Writing a good CV is a really tricky task for even the most experienced professionals. So today, I'm going to take you through how to write a great CV which will give you a really high chance of getting invited to interview. When writing a CV, there are two main parts: the format and the content. The format is the general layout of the CV, while the content is the information you want to tell the employer to let them know that you are the right person for the job. Good format and content are essential. If you have great content that's poorly formatted, or vice versa, you will usually be unsuccessful. When it comes to properly formatting a CV, there are a few unwritten rules that we need to keep in mind. First of all, your CV should fit on 2 A4 pages. It should have a clear, consistent font and font size. I usually use Calibri size 12 personally. It should be broken up into easy to understand sections with bold headings. So things like education, suitability for the role, and work experience are all pretty self-explanatory. You shouldn't have any long run-on paragraphs. All of your information should be concise and laid out in bullet points to make it easier to read. And finally, your CV should be printed in black and white. Using colour or fancy graphics on your CV usually isn't a good idea because employers often print CVs in black and white, meaning that some of the information can get lost if you choose to use colour. Now, there are a million different ways to structure the content of a CV, but this example has proven time and again to be very effective. So let's break it down and have a look at each section individually. Here we have our name and contact information. You can include your home address here if you want, but I usually just include my email address and telephone number to keep things simple, and employers generally don't need your home address at this point. Next we have our education. We want to list our education history in date order, starting with the most recent and working our way back. When listing subjects and results obtained, generally put your highest results first. You can see in the list of GCSEs, which are United Kingdom's school level qualifications, that we have listed English and Maths first. And that's because many employers view English and Maths as the most important, so it's a good idea to keep them at the top for simplicity. The next and probably most important section is our suitability for the role. And this is where we're going to tell the employer exactly why we would be a good fit and why they should hire us. Now, I know that a lot of people aren't comfortable with the sell yourself aspect of CV writing because they don't want to come across as overconfident or cocky, but all we're going to do in this section is explain to the employer how we meet the criteria set out in their job description. But before we write anything here, we need to take a very close look at the job description of the role that we are applying for. Here we can see an example of a job description you might find online. We can see the job title, which is for an IT training consultant, then the employer name, location, salary, etc., etc. And as we look down, we can see a brief role description, and then the essential criteria and desirable criteria. The essential criteria laid out by the employer is a list of requirements which must be met in order to be considered for the role. The desirable criteria are additional skills or qualifications which may be taken into account by the employer to help them choose the best candidate for the role. Generally, you are going to need to meet all of the essential criteria, but if you're only missing one or two minor things, don't be put off applying, and I'm going to give you some examples of how to deal with this situation later on in the video. We are going to use the essential criteria and desirable criteria posted by the employer to structure the suitability for the role section of our CV. Now, this is a great little trick that does 3 really beneficial things for us. Firstly, it means we don't waste any time writing about things that aren't relevant to the role. It shows the employer that we have read their job specification really closely, which shows great attention to detail. Thirdly, and most importantly, it means the employer doesn't have to look for anything in our CV, as all the important information is laid out in big, bold letters. Employers have to look through hundreds of CVs, so making yours easy to read is a huge help and is going to get your CV noticed. Looking at our CV and the job description side by side lets us see how we should be formatting the suitability for the role section. The first essential criterion in this case is having a 3rd level qualification. Now, we have already covered this in our education section, so we can move on to the next criterion, which is extensive experience delivering training material to internal and external stakeholders. So what we want to do is take this as our heading. And don't be afraid to use the exact same wording that they have used, because it shows that you're paying really close attention. Now, a lot of people think that you need to be some kind of wordsmith or master of the English language to write a good CV, but that's not the case at all. Keep it simple, keep it concise. What we want to highlight in our bullet point list is how our skills match up with the requirement, and don't be afraid to give specific examples. In this CV, I have started by saying that for 2 years I was a member of the training department with Company X, which involved delivering training to internal and external stakeholders, again using the exact same wording as in the job description. In the next bullet point, we go on to say about how I helped create training videos and educational content. And in the other bullet points, I highlight that I have trained people at all levels and I can communicate things simply, because I think that all of these skills and experiences are relevant and fall under the extensive experience delivering training material umbrella. We can see that the next essential criterion is proficient with IT solutions and software. Then, I just go on to write about what software solutions I am proficient with, as well as my ability to communicate how these work in an easy to understand way, as I feel that will be important for this role. And as we go down the list of essential and desirable criteria, we just continue to take these as our headings and write a little bit about our skills and experience for each. The most difficult thing here, guys, is deciding which information to include. Everyone's skills and experiences are different, but hopefully this example CV will give you some ideas about what to write in yours. As we make our way down the list, one criterion I want to highlight is communication skills. Nearly every job asks for this, and it's a surprisingly tricky thing to address well on a CV. What I like to do is break communication skills down into written and verbal. Written communication includes emails, letters, reports, articles, etc. So saying something along the lines of, I frequently write reports read by senior management, or I communicate via email on a regular basis and maintain a professional tone at all times. These can be really good examples of excellent written communication. Verbal communication includes things like phone calls, face-to-face interactions, or presentations, and it's really good here to highlight any experience you have with these. So saying something along the lines of, I have experience delivering presentations to audiences of peers, or I routinely meet with senior management to deliver status updates and progress reports, are examples of great verbal communication. So in this case, we meet all of the essential and desirable criteria, which is great. It means that we have a good chance of getting an interview. But sometimes we may not meet all of the essential or desirable criteria. Say for instance that on the job description, one of the essential criteria was experience with software X. Now imagine that we don't have any experience with software X. What's the best thing to do in this case? What I would recommend is, first of all, don't avoid it. A lot of people avoid certain aspects of a job description because they don't have that particular skill or experience, and avoiding is not a good solution. The first thing I would do in this instance is go onto YouTube and type in Software X tutorial and watch a couple of instructional videos which show you how to use the software. Then, in your CV, you can write something along the lines of, while I have not had the opportunity to use Software X in my career to date, I understand the basics of how it works and the processes that it can be used for. I am eager to work with Software X and learn more about it. That way you haven't ignored the requirement, but you have addressed it honestly and with the intent to learn more, which really does go a long way. Work experience is our next section. Now, a lot of people think that the work experience section should be really long and detailed, but again guys, that is not the case. What we should show here is each of our previous job roles in date order, starting with the most recent. So we include the dates we worked there, our job title, the company name, and a brief description of our duties, and that's it. The final section, interests and extra information, is optional. We can include this if we want. I personally like this section because I think it's a good opportunity to give the employer an idea of who you are as a person. In this example, I have said that I spend my spare time playing PC games and that I'm a bit of a technology buff. because the job I applied for was technology based. I think it's good to show that I'm interested in tech in my spare time. Just to summarise then guys, the CV I have shown throughout this video is a really great example of how you should structure your CV based on the job that you are applying for. Doing this takes a little bit more time, but it will give you a much higher chance of success. As I mentioned previously, there is no such thing as the perfect CV, and the CV on screen is no exception. I actually realised during the edit of this video that I made a pretty big error in the CV, but I decided to leave it in. If you think you've spotted what it is, feel free to leave a message in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this far. If you enjoyed the video or learned something new, go ahead and leave a like, as it really helps small channels like these. My next video is going to be aimed at those who have little or no work experience, and hopefully it can provide some guidance to give you a great kickstart in your career. So stay tuned to the Career Counsellor.